Welcome to Lesson 5. Let's have a look at the impact of overfeeding on body composition. Let's first set the stage with the principle that the body is driven towards survival primarily, and therefore it will do what it can to defend against changes in energy balance. So it's got this drive towards homeostasis and it wants to preserve the physiological status quo. So it resists the effects of both overfeeding as well as underfeeding. And we'll see some interesting ways that it does so. But first, let me read this excerpt from a, a really cool systematic review by Bray and Bouchard. The overfeeding induced 10% gain of body weight was accompanied by a robust increase in total daily energy expenditure of about 500 calories a day. Notably, reductions in body weight by approximately 10 or 20% decreased total daily energy expenditure by only about 300 calories a day. And so, yes, we're looking at resistance to change in both directions. This is a really interesting study because it takes a look at the impact of a very large carbohydrate dose. So on average, right around 500 grams or so, almost 500 grams. The mean carbohydrate intake amongst these individuals in the study was 479 grams. So the interesting part of this study, now keep in mind, imagine eating 500 grams of carbohydrates, not by weight, but by gram amounts of carbohydrate. So during the 10 hours after the meal, 133 grams of carbohydrate, 17 grams of fat, and 29 grams of protein were oxidized. This is during the 10-hour postprandial period. And so glycogen storage during this period, during this 10-hour period after eating the massive amount of carbohydrates of almost 500 grams, was a 346 gram gain in glycogen stores. So, if you recall, glycogen is the body's stored form of carbohydrate. So, the really interesting part with this study, and this is, I highlighted the net lipogenesis or the net gains in fat mass were essentially zero. And I'll just read verbatim the author's conclusions. The data imply that, number one, the capacity for glycogen storage in man is larger than generally believed. And number two, fat synthesis from carbohydrate will not exceed fat oxidation after one high carbohydrate meal, even if it is uncommonly large. When a single high carbohydrate meal is consumed, dietary carbohydrate merely has the effect of reducing the rate of fat oxidation. These findings challenge the common perception that the conversion of carbohydrate to fat is an important pathway for the retention of dietary energy and for the accumulation of body fat. So, yeah, I have to agree. Imagine eating 300, 400, or 500 grams of carbohydrate at a time and getting the fat storage rates meticulously measured over a 10-hour period, and no fat storage occurs. And the important thing about this particular study is it was not after specific glycogen depleting protocol. This was just fasted in the morning, and this was under the conditions of the habitual diets of these particular subjects. So that's the striking thing about these findings. So a subsequent study by the same lead author. So this was massive carbohydrate overfeeding for 7 days after a 3-day low carbohydrate glycogen depletion protocol. So this was the first study to ever systematically assess the upper limit of human glycogen storage after glycogen depletion followed by massive carbohydrate overfeeding, meaning over 800 grams a day of carbohydrate. So, as shown on the right, total body weight decreased by 0.8 kilograms during the 3-day high fat, low carb phase, where the diet was essentially ketogenic, 50-ish grams of carbohydrate a day on average for 3 days. And it was high fat, low moderate-ish protein. And this was undergone in conjunction with exercise designed to deplete muscle glycogen. So this is the 3-day glycogen depletion phase that was followed by massive carbohydrate intake. So the maximum increases in stored glycogen were 1,146, 629, and 654 grams. Now, this is in the subjects. These were the respective gains in stored glycogen in these subjects. And the mean gain in glycogen storage increase was 810 grams. So this is striking, given that typical adults will carry around, on the low end, like 3 to 4-ish hundred grams of muscle glycogen in total in the body. And on the higher end, like 500 to 600 grams. But when you do a depletion phase plus a massive carb overfeeding phase, then we can find out what is the maximal glycogen storage capacity. And this is exactly what these authors investigated. So the saturation of glycogen stores occurred at the 4th day of carbohydrate overfeeding. So here we have day 1, 2, and 3 of the low carb / glycogen depletion phase. And then here's day 4, 5, 6, 7. And it was at the end of day 7 that saturation of glycogen occurred. And total body weight increased by 4.6 kilograms by the end of the 7 days. And I highlighted the amount of carbohydrates that the subjects took in. They consumed 836 to 1,073 grams of carbohydrates a day in an escalating manner. So this dotted line here represents carbohydrate intake. You can see that increasing over time during this period here, day 4, 5, 6, 7. At the end of day 7, glycogen storage was maximal. And notably, it was not until glycogen stores had increased by about 500 grams that carbohydrate oxidation and glycogen storage became insufficient to dispose of all the dietary carbs, thereby initiating de novo lipogenesis. In other words, fat synthesis and storage. So what I'd like to draw your attention to here is that it's on day 4 that about 800-ish grams of carbs were consumed, but no fat was gained yet. It was on day 5 that you begin to see in this area over here, net de novo lipogenesis. It was on the 2nd day of massive carbohydrate overfeeding, over 800 grams, that fat synthesis began to occur. Fat synthesis and storage began to occur. So this was much more extreme in terms of carbohydrate overfeeding than the previous study, where they fed their subjects. I'm backing up now, where the subjects ate an average of 479 grams of carbohydrate in a single feeding. And then they measured the physiological consequences of that and found no fat storage, no de novo lipogenesis occurring. And this sort of extends those findings by doing a massive carb overfeeding for 7 days after that depletion phase, and seeing that fat storage didn't even begin until the 2nd day of carb overfeeding, and the absolute amount of carbs was just colossal. All right, let's look at chronic overfeeding studies. And I'll show you what I think is interesting about this stuff. So here we have this tabulated like this. Here are the references, the authors, and the number of subjects who were men / who were women. Here's number of subjects. Here's men and women, and each of these rows represent a group of subjects within the study. So they represent a study arm. And so you can see the body fat percentages of the subjects over here, ranging looks like 14% to 26%. And physical activity is tabulated as well. And by the way, this is part of a really great review by a friend and colleague of mine named Alex Leaf. And the reference is here at the bottom. He did a really good job putting this review together. He co-wrote it with another colleague of mine, Jose Antonio. So physical activity varied across these studies. And you can see there's resistance training in some studies and inactivity in others. You can see the caloric surpluses ranging from as little as 400 calories to as much as 1,250 calories. And then you see the protein amounts over here. This will be part of an important point that I'm going to make. And then you see the different gains in total body weight, fat mass, fat-free mass, and percentage of that total mass gained as body fat. So we go ahead and highlight this stuff. The studies with the highest protein intakes, where that involved resistance training subjects, resulted in 0% fat gain, despite caloric surpluses ranging anywhere from 380 calories to 800 calories of above and beyond maintenance intakes. So that is fascinating. And take a look at the protein amounts ranging from 2.4 grams per kilogram all the way up to 4.4 grams per kilogram. And in contrast, you can see the other studies where subjects are sedentary, and protein is sometimes it's high, sometimes it's low. It's kind of a mix all over the place. And you see this range of body weight gain as fat mass, ranging pretty substantially, mostly falling near the middle or maybe 2/3 of the gains were fat gain. But with non-exercising subjects, you see a lot less favorable gains in body weight. It's the slight majority of it is going to be fat mass. Whereas, once again, very interestingly, in Antonio et al. Studies and over here Campbell et al., these high protein intakes combined with resistance training with resulted in some very, very interesting stuff. Antonio et al.'s subjects experienced basically non-significant gains in anything. And if anything, we see statistically non-significant decreases in fat mass. And we have these minor increases in lean mass. So we're basically seeing recomposition in Antonio et al.'s subjects with high protein intake plus resistance training. Just super interesting how different the gains in body mass can be, or lack of gains in body mass can be, depending on what the caloric surplus is based on and also the training state of the subjects. All right. So I'm going to go over this. This is part of the next lesson. So I'm going to end here. I'll see you back at the final lesson where we talk about the big picture of programming and summarize what we've learned in this module.